My name is Philip Kedge and I am the director of the McKenzie Friend UK network, and all my blogs, all my views and opinions are entirely my own. Now today we have something slightly different. I was contacted by a solicitor by the name of Mr. Stuart Barlow, who sent me a book which he has recently authored and asked me if I would do a review, and I said I would, and gladly put this review on the website. And the book is called A Practical Guide to Working with Litigants in Person and McKenzie Friends in Family Cases. And if you want to order a copy of this book, then you can do through the link below. So, delighted to review it. I can say off the bat that it's a very good read indeed, and I've taken some notes, so I'll start off and go through those. So in the introduction, Mr. Barlow makes the point that the number of litigants in person has grown enormously over the previous years. And the first two chapters he explains in plain English what a litigant in person is, and identifies the need and reality for the court system to have to adapt and really modernise in order to cater for the increased numbers of litigants in person. He makes a point that the number of cases where both parties have been represented has halved in recent years. And this really is the focus of the book. It's intended for lawyers, litigants in persons and McKenzie Friends, examining how, in this new reality, how people can work alongside each other meaningfully and respectfully. In chapter 3, it's titled, Why Do We Have Litigants in Person? And really, it's the only chapter that I have an issue with. Mr. Barlow explains the reasons why there are increasing numbers of litigants in person and correctly identifies the reduction of legal aid. But he also states that more litigants in person are believing that they are capable of preparing and managing their own cases. However, he then suggests that litigants in person who do so are, and I quote, misguided, perhaps misguided. From my opinion, litigants in person are not misguided. They are absolutely correct in their conclusions that the family court doesn't need lawyers. The family court system is built on a foundation of access to justice for everyone, that there is little law in the family court process, and there is absolutely no requirement or expectation for litigants in person to know any law. And there is, of course, no advantage in having a lawyer, because if someone was advantaged in having a lawyer over someone who didn't, they would have a system which would advantage those with means and money to pay for one over those who don't. And that means we would have a corrupt family court system. We just don't have a corrupt system. And so there's no advantage in having a lawyer over a person who doesn't. So I don't like this word misguided, and I think indeed the reality is that the public are actually growing up, that the public are empowering themselves to take forward their own cases. They're now refusing to go down the road of paying often tens of thousands of pounds for totally unnecessary, and I'm going to even say from my experience in general, extortionate legal fees. People are no longer prepared to put thousands of pounds on credit cards, getting themselves potentially into lifelong crippling debt. So rather than being accused of being misguided, I think the public are thinking intelligently and voting with their feet. And that is why McKenzie Friends like myself are in so much demand as non-legal entities, as lay people, to support them through the court process at a fraction of the cost of lawyers. So jumping to chapter 5, it's headed Implications of Working with the Litigant in Person. And paragraph 2 very much stands out for me. It says, Mr. Barlow says, in cases involving a litigant in person, there is frequently more work to be done by the lawyer acting for the legally represented party, and the proceedings can be more costly for their client. This could be true, and indeed something that, as a McKenzie friend, I assist my clients to use to their advantage. You see, I used to be a critical incident commander in the police. One of the first things you do during a conflict is to establish clear lines of communication. So if the other side is paying thousands of pounds of their money for a lawyer to represent them, then that's very good news for my client. That means that we have clear lines of communication at absolutely no cost to my client. Now, the chapter also makes the interesting point that courts will often be more flexible towards a litigant in person. And Mr. Barlow states, and I think it's a reference, the court is obliged to afford procedural fairness to all parties, whether representing or appearing in person, and the duty of the court extends to providing assistance as required. Again, this supports my point that there is no advantage in having a lawyer, because a person cannot be disadvantaged by not having a lawyer. And if that means that the court has to be more lenient towards a litigant in person, then that rightly balances fairness. So when you put these issues together, it again raises a question: why would anyone want to pay often thousands of pounds for legal representation? It doesn't actually make sense. Now, chapters 6 and 7 looks at who are litigants in person and the difficulties they may face. And to name a couple, Mr. Barlow points out that litigants in person, quite rightly, can be unfamiliar with the language and specialist vocabulary in proceedings, may have little knowledge of the procedures involved, may be ill-informed in presenting evidence, and may lack objectivity, may make basic errors in the preparation of their case, and how they may find it difficult to follow orders and directions. These can all be very fair points, and the book explains how lawyers need to understand these issues and potential problems and be sensitive to them. But of course, that's why litigants in person need someone like myself as a McKenzie friend to support them with all these issues at a fraction of the cost of lawyers. Now, jumping forward to paragraph 10, the book talks about McKenzie friends, and I think Mr. Barlow is understanding that we are gaining significant traction and popularity, that people are turning to us in large numbers as alternatives to lawyers. And this must be a very difficult subject for Mr. Barlow to write about. And he is, in my view, quite brave in doing so, because Mr. Barlow is the first lawyer I know who seems to be extending what I'm going to call that olive branch. And he appears to have that environmental scanning ability to look to the future and to consider how we can work alongside each other, or indeed perhaps even in potential collaboration in the future. I get a strong sense that this book is trying to set that future pathway. It is a brave move. I can see that in some quarters in the legal establishment that this may not go down too well. Now, chapters 11 to 16 provide some very clear and helpful advice and signposting for litigants in person and even for lawyers. It gives practical suggestions as to how lawyers should engage with litigants in person and lay advisors. I do note, however, that it makes reference to the PSU, or Personal Support Unit. The book was published in 2020, but the Personal Support Unit changed its name to Support Through Court, so that section may need updating. But these signposting and advice chapters are actually very good and contains helpful pointers for everyone involved in the family court system. The last chapters ask, where do we go from here? And concludes with, again, more helpful information and an appendix. But it is an interesting question in terms of where we go from here. Because currently, in 80% of family court hearings, at least one party is not represented. There is exponential growth in people seeking McKenzie friends. I think lawyers, particularly solicitors, need to fundamentally look at their entire business models for the future. Indeed, barristers have already started doing that because they have direct access to barristers, for example, for a final hearing. And indeed, many barristers are now turning to people like myself as McKenzie friends to assist in preparing their clients for that final hearing. So it's almost as if we are now taking over the traditional role of, say, a solicitor at a fraction of the cost. So solicitors need to start thinking outside the box and to make dramatic changes. But I'm not sure how capable many of them are at doing that. I think so many lawyers or solicitors are institutionalised into the way that they work and will find it very difficult to adapt and change. However, if they don't, I believe that in 5 years, 80% of cases, of all cases, will have no solicitors or lawyers involved for either party. And that's very good news for a business like myself, but of course a concern for lawyers. So in conclusion, I would recommend this book fully. It took me about an hour to read, and it is a book that I would return to for information. It's thought-provoking, it has good information, and it starts what I think is a very interesting and timely debate. It has something in it for lawyers, litigants in person, and McKenzie friends. But what I think is most interesting is this acceptance of the current direction of travel in the family courts and what I infer as this olive branch to litigants in person and McKenzie friends and other lay advisors like myself. I think Mr. Barlow is one of the first as a lawyer to write about this, and as such he is a leader in his field at asking difficult questions. I hope others and his colleagues will take this on board and this debate moves forward in a positive and respectful manner. I did note in the preface, Mr. Barlow wrote the following: "My thanks to all my fellow family lawyers who have shared their own experiences in cases involving an unrepresented opponent, and thanks to the many litigants in person and McKenzie friends who have worked with me over the years to bring about a satisfactory outcome of those cases." And that's very much the spirit in which this book was written, and I think, having read it, it opens up the opportunity to respond with the same spirit and actually to start looking at how we can work together or in collaboration moving forward. So a very good read, which I fully recommend. And as I said, you could download or get a copy, buy a copy of the book from the link on the website just below this.